Well, thank you everybody for joining our presentation on VMware HCX from zero to hero. Now, our hope is that you'll know nothing at the start and you'll have enough knowledge to be dangerous by the end of it. So I'll be interested on your feedback to see if that's actually going to be the case, right? So we're going to go through basic introductions. You know who we are for the most part. If you don't, you'll find out soon enough. We're going to go on about what is HCX, its use cases, what it's made up of. And then Chris Noon thought he'd be really clever and decided to do a live demo. Well, you know, some people like to live dangerously. He's one of them. So a bit about me. I'm Bilal. I've worked at VMware for nearly a year now. I work for PSO as one of their senior consultants. I am a VCDX number 251. I just put that in there to annoy Chris more than anything else. I am a V-expert as well. I've been for about 4 years now. Two things that you really need to know about me: I'm a big Batman fan and I like Nando's. And the third thing is my favorite color is orange. You can follow me on Twitter at that handle, and I do blog at vMusketeers as well.
So hi, my name's Chris Noon. I work for Clarinet UK. I am the network technical lead. I focus mainly on SDN and NFV technologies. So that encompasses HCX. I'm a first-time V-expert for V-expert 2020. I don't have my VCDX as many times as Bilal likes to mention that to me. I'm a huge fan of basketball, so whether that be watching or playing. So that's my Twitter handle. And I blog on vMusketeers as well, so you can catch me and Bilal there. So first of all, let's talk about what HCX is. First and foremost, it's a VMware product. It's been around for a couple of years now. But what you'll really find is that they're pushing that HCX marketing and that HCX story in the last 12 to 18 months. Typically marketed as a cloud migration platform. So you're talking about your legacy data centers into that VMC on AWS or Azure or GCP in the future. That's typically the story you'll see, typically the marketing push you'll see, but it does have some other cool use cases. So you can migrate from DC to DC. So whether that be legacy kit into new kit or just DC closures, you can use HCX for that migration. And it does do it with minimal disruption and maximum flexibility, which is why Bilal and I really like this technology.
And we're not biased in the slightest, not even the slightest.
Not at all. Those t-shirts don't help.
Yeah, 100%.
So part of the use cases that I've seen as a VMware partner is we use it to migrate from our old legacy data centers into our new data centers. So Clarinet are a private cloud provider. We have an old product and a new product being Clarinet Cloud, and we migrate into that Clarinet Cloud. So we use HCX to migrate, or we have used HCX to migrate some of our workloads from that legacy data center into our new data center. We've also had use cases where customers, external customers, want to get rid of some of their equipment, close down certain DCs, but they want to keep that virtual element running. So they migrate from their data centers into our private cloud. So internal to external into our new private clouds are the use cases I've seen. And Bilal's had a slightly different experience, so he can take over from here.
Cheers for that, Chris. Yeah, so it's interesting that Chris Noon works for a partner, so he's done a lot of things internally to help customers move from their own clouds into Clarinet or from legacy Clarinet into the newer, fancier Clarinet. Now, my point of view is I've come in for VMware PSO and I see a lot of customers that are just stuck in technical debt. They've got old vSphere environments that they're end of life now. The people that designed them and set them up have long since gone, moved on to other things, and they just don't know what to do with them anymore. They feel a bit stuck, right? Which is why HCX, which comes bundled with VCF, is actually quite a good play from VMware's point of view. Customers like VCF because it's all automated, you know, everything's taken care of for you for the most part. It's very hard to get things wrong. But then the problem comes, how do you get your stuff out of the legacy stuff into the new fancy VCF deployment? And that's what HCX is there to help you do, right? You want to move out, you can do it in multiple ways. You want to move out, bulk move VMs at a time, you can do that. You want to vMotion them one at a time, you can do that as well. So you can dictate how you go about it and how much app owner involvement you need as well. You can do it quick, you can do it slow. So if you have to exit a data center quickly, you can do that. It does have a DR feature as well, which is interesting. It's nowhere near as fancy as SRM, SRM does all the stuff that we all know and love, recovery plans. But if you just got one base DR features where you can do basic recovery of apps and reprotect and fail them over and fail them back, HCX will do that for you as well. And so some customers are more than happy just to use that feature. Now, the main components of HCX, now it's split into two distinct parts. You have the management plane and you have the data plane. Now, the management plane is made up of HCX managers. Now, the managers have a one-to-one mapping to the vCenter. So you have the HCX connector, which is what you deploy on your legacy side, which can be vSphere 5.1 and above, and it can support ESXi 5.0 and above. So you deploy that on the legacy side, and then you deploy the cloud appliance in whatever cloud platform you've got. If it's an internal cloud, it'll be VCF, or any vSphere deployment that's 6.5 and above, because 6.0 is now end of life. So once you've got them paired up, they talk to the respective vCenters, and then that's how you go about managing your migrations and using the APIs and your scripting and all that jazz. Now, the service mesh is what does the heavy lifting. You can have a service mesh that has a minimum of 1 appliance or a maximum of 3. You can have a few more appliances than that, but that's the most common deployment. Now, the interconnect appliance, I tell people, is just your vSphere replication manager. When HCX does bulk migrations, it is using vSphere replication under the hood. So all the limitations and all the things that you use and liked about vSphere replication are the same for HCX as well. Now, the layer 2 extender is what a lot of people use when they want to migrate VLANs and subnets across into NSX, be it NSX-V or NSX-T. So it patches into your distributed switch, that port group, it extends it out into NSX, and it extends the gateway and can swing the gateway over into NSX, letting it take over as well. Now, the WAN optimizer is an interesting piece because it does exactly what it says it does, right? It can do rate limiting as well. So if your WAN connection is quite limited, 100 meg, 200 meg, you can tell it not to oversubscribe that link. It does dedupe and compression as well. But myself and Chris were discussing this before this call. We don't actually see that many people use it. Why? Because it's quite resource heavy. And legacy environments can usually be quite constrained. So deploying a WAN optimizer usually doesn't work out, especially in their testing. Yeah, it sends less data across the link because it's so resource heavy that it actually becomes a bit of a bottleneck that they actually just prefer just to send the raw data across because it's easier for them. Now, each appliance does slightly different things. You've got the hybrid interconnect service, which handles the base migrations. The Vmotion service, which runs on the interconnect appliance as well, allows you to use what to everybody would seem like a traditional Vmotion. I was just testing it for a customer today. You lose a ping on average as it motions across, Vmotions across, so you don't lose any connectivity. App owners are unaware, and a lot of customers like this, but it's a serial operation, only one at a time, right? So that can slow down your migrations overall, which is why a lot of customers use this thing for their heavy hitter VMs that they can't have any downtime for, or they don't know who the app owners are, they don't want to engage with them, they just need to get the VMs out. While bulk migration, vSphere replication, you create a sync, it happens in the background a couple of days before, you tell HCX, I want to cut over at midnight on Sunday, and it does it for you. And it cuts them over, powers them down, renames them on the source with a Unix code timestamp so you know exactly when it was migrated, brings them out of the destination in the network that you say, be it standard switch, distributed switch, NSX-V or NSX-T segments, and brings them all online. There is minimal downtime there as well, but a lot of customers use that for their bulk. They want to move a big chunk in any given wave. Then you have the DR service as well, as I talked about earlier. Nowhere near as fully fledged as SRM, but for some customers, it does exactly what they want it to do. WAN optimizer is optional, and the network extension service patches into each distributed switch. It has a one-to-one mapping to the distributed switch. So that's something to bear in mind. If you have multiple distributed switches, you're going to need multiple network extender appliances, and that will impact your design moving forward. I've seen a lot of customers not really take that into account, and then they've had to re-architect their design team to incorporate that when they want to extend layer 2. Now, the service mesh, you can have more than 3 appliances in there, depending on what you want to do. But as you can see, it is quite resource heavy, and the services are tied to the CPU and RAM requirements. If you try to adjust them, the services will not start. Right? And that becomes a problem, especially when you want to try it out in your home lab, you know, as a proof of concept. I couldn't deploy these on my NUCs, so I had to deploy them on different hardware. And as you can see, the one optimizer has quite heavy IOPS and disk requirements as well. And if your legacy side, as we see, can be quite resource constrained, it's usually not worth it doing it because it provides more of a hindrance than anything else. Some key considerations that you should take into account when you're deploying and designing your HCX deployment. So one-to-one mapping per vCenter. All the other appliances are what they call a service mesh. So if you read service mesh, you know what it includes. Network appliance for extending one-to-one mapping to the distributed switch at either side. Bulk migration, need a hardware level of 7, which off the top of my head is about ESXi 4, because I think that's when vSphere applications started to do the rounds properly. Vmotion needs hardware level of 9, which is ESXi 5.5. By default, you can do 100 migrations at a time. You can queue that much. But if you global calls with GSS, it'll up it to 200 if you give them a decent use case. Now, vMotion is one at a time. So if you log 5 vMotion, HCX vMotions, one happens and the rest are queued till that one completes, and then it goes through in a serial fashion, which can be quite slow, which is why, once again, as I said, most people go with this as for their bigger, heavy hitter VMs that they don't want downtime for and use bulk migration for everything else. HCX is one of the few VMware products that has a very aggressive upgrade cycle. The new release comes out every 2 weeks. So if you find a bug and you log a call with GSS and get engineering involved, there's a good chance within the next 2 weeks that bug will be fixed and you'll be good to go. Now, the problems that you have here are that if you get too far behind in the upgrade process, you fall out of support. So if you fall 4 versions behind, you're no longer supported and you're forced to upgrade. But when I say forced, if you call it VMware support, they're going to tell you to upgrade, right? But even then, let's say you leave it about 6 months down the line, there's a good chance that they will remotely turn off your HCX services because you're that far out of support. So it's important that you keep on top of this, and I stress this to customers all of the time. Keep your deployment as simple as possible because you're going to have to go through and upgrade these things on a consistent basis to make sure you stay on the latest version, all the bug fixes, all the new features that come out. Because they're so aggressive, even myself and Chris, who work with HCX on a daily basis, we get caught out sometimes because features that weren't around a month ago suddenly become available and we have to read through the documentation to actually find out. And now I'm going to hand over to Chris because he thought he'd be clever and do a live demo, and I wish him the best of luck.
He who dares wins, Bilal.
Absolutely, my friend.
Okay. I can't share until you stop, mate.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, you should all be able to see a vSphere client. Okay, so essentially what I've got here is I've got 2 vCenters. I have Nested Lab 2 and I have Nested Lab 1. Nested Lab 1 is my, we'll call it cloud, my destination, and Nested Lab 2 is my old DC that I want to migrate off. I have a very small environment. I have Web 1 and Web 2. And I just want to show you, if I jump onto Web 1, that we can see the IP address is 10.050.11 and the other one is 10.050.12. That's my other web appliance. Okay, nice and pingable. So what I want to do is I want to move from this old legacy data center into this new data center. But before I do that, I just want to go through and show you a little bit about HCX, what the GUI looks like and what you should expect. So there's an admin portal for HCX. And once you deploy it, you can get to this on the URL port 9443. And this is the dashboard. It just shows you what it's linked to. NSX, vCenter, SSO. It's quite similar to NSX if you've used that before. You can go into the Appliance Summary where you can see the services. Here you can stop, start, and restart some of the services should you have any problems or if GSS recommends you to. You then have some general configuration, some activation keys, vCenter links, NSS links, orchestrator links, SSO, that kind of stuff.
So a good thing to point out is that the cloud side has a hard requirement for an NSX deployment, be it V or T. The legacy side is optional, but but the cloud side, you have to have NSX installed in somewhere. How you use it is up to you, but you have to have NSX in there.
That's a good point. So in the source, in the connector area, I have no NSX, and in the destination, our cloud, we have NSX-T running, as you can see there. So that's linked there, and that'll be NSX-T. You've got data center locations. I've placed one of our HCX managers in Gibraltar, which is where I am, and one of them in Paris, just because the graph looks a little better. So this is kind of the admin area where you can set up NTP, general network settings, some DNS, any static routes you want, upgrade from an administration area, that kind of stuff. So it's fairly basic, just looking at services and general setup. Okay, and then if you move to the kind of consumer portal. So the consumer portal for the cloud is very similar to that of the connector. You notice a slight difference there with compute and networking, but for the most part, it's extremely similar. So this is the overall dashboard. It tells me how many VMs I've migrated, migrations in process, that kind of stuff. You can see here my Gibraltar site and my Paris site here. If you were to have a lot more spread around the world, you would then end up having links across the world.
So for the most part, you initiate all your migrations and creations of service meshes from the legacy connector side. That's where you do most of your configuration, and it automatically talks to the cloud side and configures everything from that point of view.
Yeah, that's right. So if you actually try to do some of the stuff from the cloud side, it'll give you errors. It might let you go through a little bit of it, but it always tries and points you to the connector side. So we'll go into the site pairings in a minute, but you can see my legacy data center 2 is connected to my new cloud -1. Has some migrations, some general information about the site. And one of the cool things that has been an improvement, I think in the last 6 months or so, is the resource usage at both sites. So it tells me in my cloud, what resources am I using? And in my local data center, what am I using? So you can see whether the migrations will be able to absorb the load. So once you've gone through the overview, you have the site pairings. This is quite easy. It's essentially just the URL of the destination, a username and password. And that has to be an administrator, but you can obviously configure a normal administrator rather than use the administrator at local, vSphere local. And then you click connect, and that creates that site pairing. And what that does is it creates a site pairing between the two NSX managers. So you can.
So myself and Chris get a lot of questions about why HCX needs administrator rights into the vCenter. Well, if you think about it logically, what does it do? It's moving which VMs, it's deleting VMs, it's spinning up VMs, it's patching into distributed switches, creating networks, disabling networks, and all that type of stuff. And it needs administrator access, which is one of the hard requirements for it.
I did do some work in the past where you could actually create a custom HCX user, and it was essentially administrator minus like 2 functions. So for that, you might as well just use the admin profile and save you all that extra workload. So then once you created that site pairing, it goes into what Bilal was talking about earlier, that service mesh. And because we're a bit Blue Petery here, this is one I made earlier, but I want to go through the profiles that create this service mesh. So one of the things you have to create is a network profile for each of the elements. It's management, vMotion, and transit. So these should typically be public IP addresses, but they don't have to be for a lab environment like ours. So in the management, you can see I've used 2 of the IP addresses. I've used 1 here and 2 here. I just want to go in to show you how easy the configuration is from a network profile perspective. So if I was to edit the management, you essentially pick a network, whichever network you like. It then populates a name. You can change that name to whatever you like. And then you then give it a pool of IP addresses. And what this will do is it'll use these pool of IP addresses to assign them to your service mesh. So your IX and your L2 appliance, in my instance, there's no WAN optimizer, as Bilal says, just because of the heavy resource load. You configure a prefix and a gateway, DNS, DNS suffix, that kind of stuff. And essentially click up OK, and it'll create them. I've created 3. So what you can do is you can create a management one and a vMotion one, and use management for uplink at the source, because they allow you at the source to NAT out to the internet, whereas at the destination, they like you to have public IP addresses presented to the HCX elements. That's because the connection is initiated from the connector, the old data center, And typically the cloud was AWS can now be a new data center, has to have those non-NATed IP addresses.
And one thing to point out about the vMotion side of things is that traditionally, most people, the vMotion is a segregated layer 2 VLAN with no gateway. So what the HCX appliance does, it uses that vMotion profile, patches into the vMotion network in that cluster, and acts as a bit of a proxy. It creates a dummy host, which then it uses to proxy the VM out of that environment, crosses VPN tunnel to its sister appliance, and patches it into that at the cloud side as well. So it does a bit of trickery there to trick the host and everything to think that there's a proper vMotion going on.
Yep, that's right. One interesting thing is here, I've labeled mine transit. I said typically the cloud would have to be public IP addresses, which is the recommended type of deployment. But what you can do is if it was a DC to DC like I've done, these can be private IP addresses, and you use a dedicated MPLS circuit for that kind of data transfer. Okay, so if I go through now, you've created your network profiles. Now what you want to do is create that compute profile that the service mesh then utilizes. I think this is a little confusing. While it has the data on it, it's easier to go through how to build it. Once you've built it, you come back and look at this and it's a bit clearer. So first of all, if you you can create a new service mesh, but we can edit it and go through the same kind of steps as you would. So first of all, you create it. Create a name, so nested to connector, and you create a profile on a compute profile on both sides. You select the services that you want. So I want all of these services minus the WAN optimizer because I can't handle that load on my lab. And because I have a base license of HCX, I can't select any of these functions here. But you can upgrade your license to HCX Enterprise and get these additional features if you like. So as I'm going through, you can select the resource that you want to run it on. Obviously, my labs aren't particularly big, so resources are 1. I want this run on my home lab and my nested home lab 2, which is my old DC.
Now, a key thing to point out here as well is HCX has a differentiation between a service and a deployment cluster. So the deployment cluster is where you're telling HCX you can deploy its HCX appliances, its service mesh appliances, the IX, the layer 2, the WAN optimizer. The service cluster is what you're telling HCX it can service. So that's where your VMs are that you want to migrate. A lot of customers have one and the same thing. Other customers say, I want all the IX appliances in my management cluster, and I want it to service my prod and dev clusters. So you can do it that way as well. You just got to make sure routing and all the network profiles align for that. But most customers, just for simplicity, and I'm a big fan of keeping it simple, just deploy it out exactly where it's needed, and away you go.
Yeah, I mean, we've had discussions about customers in the past where they want it deployed, let's say, in the management area, but they want it to serve VMs in a different cluster. If you have a stretched VDS that goes across management and that cluster, that's fine. If you have separate VDSs and the IX and the L2 appliance are used in the management cluster, then you can't latch into that VDS on the cluster 1, let's say. So you have to really think about the design. And this is where me and Bilal have talked about additional presentations where you go into HCX design considerations. So moving forward, you then select a resource. So what resources do I want to use to deploy my IX, my L2 appliance? So again, I've only got 1, but this goes back to Bilal's point of where do you want the resources deployed and what do you want to use HCX for? Then I selected some data stores. You can select some folders if you want. You can also set some resource allocation if you need to. Moving forward, you then utilize those network profiles you created. So first of all is the management profile, which you've done. You select that. You then are asked for the uplink profile. You select that. And you then select the vMotion profile because you've already done that. And then moving forward, it asks you what network you want for that vSphere replication. And this is for the bulk migration. So if you use the bulk migration option, you use this network. If you use the Vmotion Migration option, which we'll get to later, you obviously use the Vmotion IPs. And then it asks you what VDS do you want to latch into to migrate. So we've selected here the nested 2, and you can see, where is it? Here, sorry. You can see here that that's the one where my VMs are going to sit, and those are the VMs we're going to extend that network for and migrate away from. So then what you do is, as you finish, it generates some rules for you. So in my lab for this, I've pretty much opened it up with an any, but it does give you some network rules that you need to open up should you do this in a production environment.
Yeah, so nearly all the problems that we see are down to networking rules and firewalls and ports not being open. That's why it's quite good there. You get those things when you configure it, you can hand that over to the networking team and tell them this is exactly what I need.
Yeah, agreed. And then once you click continue, you can see that service mesh, or sorry, that compute profile created. You're then going to click finish. Just going to finish that.
Ooh, the demo gods.
Okay, so finished, right? Now I've created my network profiles and I've created my compute profiles. What I'm interested in is combining the two to create that service mesh. So if I click on the service mesh, this is one we did earlier. This is my old DC to my new DC, and I have all of these services up and running. So if I view the appliances, I can check the appliances, I can check the tunnel status, they're all up. And they're essentially using VPN IPsec technology to go between the two sites. So this is my source site, this is my destination site, right? I have to speed up a little bit because we started late. Yep, so that's all fine there. And then what you want to do is you want to look into extending the network. So we've already extended one network. What I've extended here is my nested VLAN 50 in my old environment onto the NSX environment. So if we check our old environment, we can see these Web 1, Web 2 VMs are connected to VLAN 50, LAN 1, and that sits on our nested VDS 2. Okay, and then in our new environment, we're interested in this logical segment. And in that segment here, we can see that. That's automatically created in NSX. You don't need to create that to link it. As you create that network extension, you essentially pick a port group that you want to extend. You then put in a IP address. And it's important to note here, this will be configured on your NSX-T tier 1, or if you're in V, your Edge gateway or DLR. And what this is configured as a default gateway on there. So when you migrate the VMs over to the new environment, you can bring that interface up and the traffic starts flowing out of the new environment in NSX rather than your physical elements in the old site. Okay. So
Chris, we have a question. Right? So the question is, in regards to Chris's comments on the management and compute, is it supported to have the HCX appliances deployed in the management cluster but connected to the vCenter in the compute? So my interpretation of that question is that you've got two different vCenters in your legacy environment. Now HCX has a one-to-one mapping with the vCenter. So you'd want to deploy your HCX Manager into the vCenter that manages that compute cluster.
Yeah, so I actually tested this originally. You should deploy HCX into the vCenter that you're planning to migrate from.
Yeah, so if you've got a management vCenter that actually manages every cluster, then deploy it into the management cluster in that vCenter, and then you can see everything that that vCenter has. But if you've got segregation at the vCenter level, they have to go into the vCenter that you need to. For example, in VCF, you've got workload domain that has its own vCenter. HCX Manager has to be deployed into that workload domain.
Yeah, I agree. I've tried doing it the other way, where I've deployed the HCX elements into management vCenter and then use workloads in the and then try and migrate workloads in the workload vCenter, and it just doesn't work because it can't manage that VDS for you, which is the problem. You can do some things with, say, ELM, but it does become very difficult very quickly. It's easier just to deploy the HCX elements exactly where you want them and where the VMs you're migrating away from.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so now we've created our layer 2 extension. We can see that in our old DC VLAN 50 is extended to segment 50, no, this segment VLAN 50 here in NSX. And now what we want to do is we want to do a migration. You can see I was testing earlier, broke a bunch of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to test a bulk migration, because I think that's the most common one and the one me and Bilal see the most. So as I said before, this is my web VM2. I can ping my web VM2 quite nicely.
Now, if you've only got a couple of VMs to do, using the web interface is pretty easy. But when you need to bulk migrate 100, 200 at a time, you've got to script it. It makes life a lot easier. Myself and Chris have done multiple blog posts on various scripts you can use. So I'd recommend you look at them if you want to do quite a few migrations.
Yeah, agreed. So what you can do is you can do a migration, obviously, from the legacy DC into the cloud, which is what we're doing here. You click that reverse migration, it spins these elements around, and you can migrate from the cloud back into the DC. So it's not just one way. If you do want to, if something goes wrong or you want it back on your local area, your local DC, you can go in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about going to cloud, but you know, sometimes the cloud is not what you want and you want to come back for various reasons. HCX allows you to do that as well. You can rewind and do it again whenever it suits you.
For example, maybe you need AWS to increase performance, increase load for a short amount of time while your new kit arrives, and then you can swing it back in. So that reverse migration tool is really key. So what we're going to do quickly is we're going to use the Web02 here. And what I want you to notice is I'm using the top of the screen here, and I'm selecting elements, and they're populating into the VM here. So I can select the folder. I can select what type of storage I want. I can select the format. What's interesting is it populates everything. So if you were doing 5 or 6 of them, it populates it automatically. If I change one, it doesn't change in the global top settings. Then if I've made a mistake, I can flick it around and it changes all of them again. So I want to use a bulk migration. So essentially we're just sending it to a new host 13 on its local storage using bulk migration. And we're sending it from this network to this network that we decided. A key thing here is, can I go? Once you click finish. Yeah, so this is a dummy VM that's quite small. So non-VMware, no tools, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to send it over anyway. Okay, and that migration is going to start. One thing I forgot to mention was during the network extension, when you do extend those networks, you select which gateway you want. So I've got 2 T1s, and depending on which T1 I want it going to, maybe this is customer 1 and this is customer 2, you can extend different local port groups into segments on different T1s. Okay, so that migration is going to start taking place now. Might not be able to finish, but we'll talk a little bit why that's going. And what you will see in vSphere is these dummy hosts here. So Bilal mentioned earlier that the IX appliance kind of latches into that vMotion network. And what it does is if you check the IX appliance and you look at the IP addresses, you can see 10.10.10.35 is actually the dummy host. So it uses the management IP to identify itself as a dummy ESXi host, but it's actually using .12 here for the vMotion network, and it latches in to that vMotion network.
And when you do a vMotion, what you'll see the VMs in the normal source cluster, and then it'll magically appear in that host, and then it will transit across and appear at the destination. But that's when you do a vMotion. We're doing a bulk migration, so it's just vSphere replication in the background.
Yeah. And then this does take a few minutes. I know we started a little bit late. Does anybody have any questions while we're waiting for this transfer to start?
You're doing such a good job that nobody's got any questions.
That's rare, usually because I present to you. Okay, yeah. So what we'll see is during this bulk migration, so like we said, there are 2 types of migrations. There's that vMotion migration, and there's the bulk migration, which we can select. The vMotion migration will essentially move this VM onto this cluster. What will happen is it will essentially just disappear from here and appear here. So there's kind of no easy rollback. You have to kind of vMotion that back. One benefit that me and Bilal both like from the bulk migration is you'll see this VM migrate over here. And what it does is it shuts down the VM here and gives it kind of some coded elements at the end. So in case you need a quick rollback or the connectivity breaks, you can just spin it up quite easily. I think there's a, oh. So you can see that there. Unfortunately, this is going to take a few minutes. Are we allowed to go over?
Okay, but while that's going on, I have a question about setting you up in a home lab. Now, yeah, nested hosts and everything are fine, but the problem you've got really is the CPU requirement. It hard codes in 8 vCPUs, and it won't even deploy them if it can't meet that, right? And that's why Intel NUCs are no good. So I had a super micro, and then I bought some Intel NUCs of Kev Johnson as well, and I used them for vSAN hybrid, and I couldn't deploy any of the HCX components to it. It's a genuine issue that I've raised, and multiple people have raised with the product team, but at the moment there's nothing you can do. You just need to make sure you meet those CPU requirements. You know, you can overcommit RAM and all the rest of it, and disk space, you can work your way around that, but you need to get that CPU thing sorted out, and there's nothing you can do about that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so that was one of the things we discussed. I bought my home lab fairly recently. Bilal and Kim, who I think is joined as well, helped me kind of build out that equipment, and HCX was one of the things I needed it for. So while I was buying it, I made sure that the physical device could take that level of CPU requirement and that RAM requirement. So I got 16 logical processors, and I've split them up in nested elements, and I don't need it for anything else other than these IX appliances that use so much CPU and RAM.
Okay, so Kev's asked a question about, how did you get access to HCX? So Kev, the standard NSX Enterprise Plus license for VRT will give you access to all the base stuff for HCX, and then you can just download it from the portal and apply it.
Yeah. Got some more questions.
Yeah, okay, so we've got another question. So are all the features available when using HCX on legacy vSphere? Okay, so the vCenter has to be version 5.1, right? And HCX vMotion is only available on ESXi 5.5 and hardware 11 version 9. Okay, so v5.5 or above. Bulk migration works all the way down from ESXi hosts that are 5.0 and above, and that hardware level as well. So that can be a constraint as well on the way that you do things depending on that. Now you can upgrade the hardware levels, you can use a subset of hosts. There are loads of things you can do to try and mitigate that, but they're the hard requirements for that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the use cases, right? When you have when you have data center equipment that's either really old or you have software versions that's really old, do you want to upgrade all of that stuff to then move it to the new DC? But HCX helps you migrate from that legacy element, like you said, from 5.05 or 5.5, sorry, and then migrate it into the new elements running, 6.5, 6.7.
If you want to do a vMotion, you risk maybe getting one of your test hosts, upgrading it to 5.5 and keeping it there, and then moving VMs to that, upgrading the hardware on those VMs and moving them across like that, doing it in a bit of a stage fashion. It really depends on what your risk appetite is, right?
Yeah, indeed. So Dan's got a question, the minimum requirements for this lab, for example. So unfortunately, me and Bilal have tried it. We obviously know that the requirements for these devices are extremely high, too high for most people's home labs. If you try to knock down this, so if you turn off this VM and you take it to, let's say, 2 CPU and 1 gig of RAM, the device won't boot. It comes up with a bunch of errors and it won't boot. It does a self-check to make sure it has enough CPU and enough RAM to warrant what it wants to do before it boots up properly.
So if you've got a physical host that can handle 8 vCPUs, you can overcommit to your heart's content for the lab, right? But you need to make sure that you have a host that can handle those 8 vCPUs. If you don't, it's not going to work.
Yeah, which is what I've done. Okay, before we answer that question, you can see here that the bulk migration started moving the host over. started to migrate. You can see Web02 here has come into my new environment here. And in my old environment here, you're going to see that Web02 has now been turned off. So I'm going to start losing a couple of pings. So you can see that. Have I lost a couple of pings?
Might have already gone.
Might have already gone. So you can see it's turned off there. It's starting to spin up here. So good, no ping loss. So good this demo is, or didn't capture it. And then what you do is you'll see that one starts getting renamed in a minute once that migration finishes. We have another question. Once I have this set up, can we export the config to like a JSON file for easy deployment? So I'm not sure about the JSON file, but I know it can be automated. So me and Bilal have gone through some PowerShell scripts on how to build this out. Did we post those?
Not yet, no, we haven't. But what you can do, once you've configured it out how you want, you can take a backup. So if you have any issues, you need to redeploy it, you can restore it and it'll come back online like it never left.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about HCX is because it uses that service mesh technology. So what I'll do after this lab, for example, is I'll tear down my service mesh and I'll unextend the network. I'll delete the service mesh and that'll remove these VMs, which are the bulk of the load. Yeah, so these VMs I can actually destroy just by going into the HCX Manager service mesh and delete, and that'll bring it down. But the config of the compute profile and the network profile are already there. So to spin that back up is extremely easy. And then I just turn off my my HCX managers and I kind of save all that resource waiting for the next demo.
So there are eval licenses available. You'd have to speak to your VMware representative about that, your local TAM or whatever they can do. But if you have NSX Enterprise Plus licensing, that gives you access to HCX as well by default. So there is that as well. I know there are test licenses out there that can give you a 20 VM migration limit that I know customers have used for proof of concepts and things like that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to show this here, that now the Web02 is now on my new infrastructure, working as I wanted it to work, you know, improved CPU, all that kind of stuff. And then in my old environment, that Web02 has been renamed and it's got a bunch of numbers at the end of it.
So I chatted to product management about that. It's a Unix timestamp. So if you put that in Google, it'll tell you the exact date and time it was migrated.
Oh, very cool. Okay. So a timestamp that it was migrated. But what the bulk migration allows you to do is, let's say that migration didn't go well. Now we've lost connectivity to the new site, natural disaster. This is all gone. I can power this up. One thing we got to remember to do is just connect the network. It disconnects the network to make sure a support staff doesn't come in and turn this on, and then you've got two web servers with the same IP. And we're using this network extension that we created earlier to go between this old site's port group to this new site's NSX segment. And you should be able to see here that the migration was completed successfully. And you can share, we've got a couple of useful links. I think we've got a couple of seconds left. So if I stop sharing.
So here we go. So as you can see here, we've got these useful links here for you. So there is a HCX hands-on lab as well.
Yep.
That you can use. It's a little bit out of date, but it'll give you a good gist of what's going on, right? Myself and Chris have done quite a few blog posts on it. Nico has done some really good blog posts on it as well. And one of the product managers, Gabe, he has a website called hcx.design. All the white papers, all the advanced configuration, the user guides, all that type of stuff is there. And he keeps that quite up to date. I've used it quite a bit as well when I need to dig into the weeds a little bit. And you've got the cloud.vmware.com, VMware HCX as well, if you want to get a base overview.